Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world both foreign and familiar. Ancient Alexandria, a bustling city on the Mediterranean's edge, where the sunrise paints the harbor gold and the scent of salt water mingles with fresh bread baking in the market. You trudge alongside merchants hauling crates, their shouts slicing through the morning air, while sailors adjust sails against a clear blue sky. Around you, scholars with scrolls tucked under their arms weave through narrow streets, their footsteps echoing off limestone walls worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. You probably won't survive this day if you try sprinting through the stifling heat or ignoring the overwhelming dust that settles in every corner. But here, time moves differently, slower, measured in the quiet turning of a papyrus scroll or the scratch of a reed pen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's awake in this late or early hour. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step closer to the legendary Great Library, the heart of Alexandria, the air thickens with anticipation. Imagine the tall columns guarding the entrance, their stone cool beneath your fingertips, worn smooth by countless hands. The building itself seems alive, humming with the promise of knowledge and discovery. It's easy to picture the library as an endless maze of scrolls, stacked from floor to ceiling, each one a tiny universe of stories, theories, and histories waiting to be unlocked. Around you, merchants sell papyrus and ink on street corners, their wares aimed at the ever-growing community of scribes and scholars. The city's pulse quickens as traders from far-off lands bring goods and ideas alike, setting the stage for a daily dance of cultural exchange. You can almost hear the low murmur of voices speaking Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, and more languages mixing like spices in a bustling kitchen. But beware, Alexandria is no modern metropolis with air conditioning and quick internet searches. The summer sun blazes relentlessly, and you might find yourself longing for a breeze as you navigate crowded markets and sun-drenched courtyards. Dust curls in shafts of light, and every surface seems to hold a thin veil of ancient history. Historians still argue whether the Great Library was a single building or a collection of multiple sites spread across the city. But either way, its reputation as a beacon of learning remains undisputed. It's said that the library once housed up to 400,000 scrolls. See, imagine the weight of that knowledge pressing down on the city. The scribes who worked here could spend hours copying texts by candlelight, their quills scratching softly as they preserved the wisdom of the ages. As you follow a scholar cloaked in linen robes, your footsteps muffled on the stone floor, you pass through an arched doorway into a hall where the scent of aged papyrus hangs thick. Scrolls rest in shelves carved from marble, each one catalogued meticulously, though perhaps not always perfectly. There's evidence of the occasional scribal mistake, or even a cheeky doodle in the margins that might make you smirk. Around you, the low hum of conversation ebbs and flows. Philosophers debating whether the earth circles the sun or if the universe might be infinite, while mathematicians puzzle over new theories that could change everything. You catch fragments of voices discussing Ptolemy's latest star charts and wonder how it must have felt to be at the center of such vibrant intellectual activity. And amid all this, there's a distinct sense of curiosity, an urge to collect, catalog, and understand the world's knowledge. It's this hunger that fuels Alexandria's spirit, a city poised between the ancient and the emerging, where every scroll is a doorway to another mind, another culture. So as you settle into the rhythm of the city's morning, take a breath and let the sounds, smells, and textures wash over you. Imagine the quiet excitement of stepping into a place where ideas float as freely as the Mediterranean breeze, and the boundaries of knowledge are waiting to be pushed. You continue your slow stroll deeper into the heart of Alexandria, where the library's influence stretches beyond its marble halls into the lively agora. The marketplace buzzes with merchants, philosophers, and curious townsfolk. The aroma of fresh figs mixes with the sharp tang of olives pressed that morning, and somewhere nearby, a street musician plucks a lyre, adding a gentle soundtrack to the scene. You might expect a chaotic jumble of noise and confusion here, but instead, there's a surprising rhythm to the bustle. The Agora isn't just a place to buy goods, it's a forum where ideas are traded just as eagerly as spices or fabrics. A young man with a scroll tucked under his arm debates passionately with an older woman draped in a vibrant cloak, her hands animated as she challenges his interpretation of Homer's verses. Around them, groups gather to listen or chime in voices weaving together like a tapestry of thought. Historians still argue whether the library was more than just a collection of books. Some suggest it also functioned as a research institute, a proto-university where scholars lived, taught, and collaborated. You might picture rooms filled with students copying texts or heated discussions breaking out over the nature of the cosmos, philosophy, or medicine. Speaking of medicine, imagine a healer nearby mixing herbs in a clay bowl, trying out remedies recorded on scrolls stolen from the great library's archives. It's a world where science and superstition blur. Did you know some ancient Alexandrians believed that wearing a necklace made from the ashes of a burnt scroll could ward off illness? Whether that was true or just a hopeful superstition is still up for debate. You pass a vendor selling strange fruits from lands you can barely pronounce, their skin mottled and brightly colored. People here have an appetite for the exotic, and that curiosity fuels the city's growth. It's this appetite that keeps the library well-stocked with texts from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and beyond. Scrolls arrive by camel ship and caravan, bringing ideas and stories in a never-ending stream. On the edge of the agora, you spot a group of scribes hunched over tables, copying manuscripts with painstaking care. Their ink pots are small and delicate, and their reed pens scratch softly against papyrus. Mistakes are rare, but occasionally happen, leading to interesting little quirks in the text, like that infamous line in a medical treatise, advising to avoid the bite of the winged horse. Probably a mistranslation, but still a fun mystery. As you watch, a philosopher steps onto a raised platform and begins reciting a new theory about the nature of time itself. Some listeners nod thoughtfully, others frown in confusion, while a few mutter disagreements. It's a reminder that Alexandria was not just about preserving knowledge, but also about questioning and challenging it. You feel the sun begin to dip lower, casting long shadows across the stone pavements, the day winding down, but the city's energy still humming. The scent of cooking fires drifts in from nearby homes, mingling with the fading aroma of fresh herbs from the market stalls. Historians still argue whether the library's eventual decline was due to accidental fires, political turmoil, or gradual neglect. What's certain is that the spirit of Alexandria, the thirst for knowledge, the vibrant exchange of ideas, left a legacy that still resonates today. As you pull your cloak tighter against the cooling air, you pause to appreciate the strange, wonderful mixture of the everyday and the extraordinary that made this city so alive. From dusty scrolls to lively debates, from exotic spices to medical oddities, Alexandria is a place where history feels alive and whispering in every corner. You wander away from the bustling agora, stepping into a quieter part of Alexandria, where the great library itself stands like a beacon of knowledge. Imagine a sprawling complex far larger than any modern university library, its white marble walls gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, columns standing tall like ancient sentinels guarding wisdom. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of papyrus and ink, mingled faintly with beeswax from the torches flickering against the high ceilings. The soft murmur of voices echoes through wide halls, where scholars from all corners of the known world pore over scrolls and manuscripts. Some read quietly, fingers gently tracing lines of text. Others debate softly in corners, careful not to disturb the studious hush. You spot a librarian carefully organizing scrolls on long shelves that stretch up toward the ceiling. An early version of the card catalog would be laughably simple compared to today's digital databases, but it's a marvel for its time. Scrolls are wrapped in linen and tied with string, their contents meticulously copied by scribes who never seem to tire of the endless task. Historians still argue whether the library actually housed up to 400,000 scrolls, or if that number was exaggerated by ancient storytellers to add mystique. Either way, it was the largest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, a true treasure trove where ideas collided and blossomed. You notice a peculiar scent drifting from a nearby study, a strange mixture of herbs and incense. Turns out some scholars burned aromatic resins to help concentration or mask the smell of centuries-old parchment. Among the scrolls you find a curious fact. Some scrolls were bound in animal skin, a precursor to the modern book. It's easy to forget that before this, texts were often fragile and perishable, making the library's efforts at preservation all the more impressive. There's a rumor you overhear from a pair of philosophers that the library's director once ordered a fleet of ships to seize every book from rival libraries across the Mediterranean. It's a bold move, reflecting how fiercely knowledge was guarded and how knowledge was also power. Some question whether this aggressive collecting was ethical, while others argue it saved countless texts from destruction. You stroll into a lecture hall where a mathematician draws complex diagrams on a wax tablet. He's explaining the principles of geometry that will one day underpin modern engineering and architecture. Nearby, an astronomer gazes through a primitive instrument, charting stars and theorizing about the universe's vastness, subjects that might seem distant, yet were vibrant curiosities for Alexandria's thinkers. In the library's garden, you pause beside a small pond where lotus flowers float serenely, their delicate petals contrasting with the sharp intellect buzzing inside the walls. This space offers scholars a quiet place to reflect away from the constant stream of ideas and debates. Historians still debate how much influence the library had beyond Alexandria. Did it inspire other centers of learning immediately, or was its impact felt only centuries later? Regardless, standing here, you sense the pulse of human curiosity and ambition echoing through time. As the afternoon light softens, you feel the gentle weight of history settling around you, a feeling of awe mixed with the calm patience of a place where knowledge was both treasured and endlessly pursued. You follow a narrow corridor lined with rows of scroll cases, the texture of old limestone beneath your sandals giving a soft crunch with each step. The deeper you go, the cooler it becomes, not just physically, but in that hush before a storm way, as if ideas themselves are waiting to leap from the walls. You reach one of the library's side rooms, a chamber reserved for something particularly special, the scribes' workshop. Inside you find men and women hunched over long desks, their heads bowed, their fingers stained with ink. Made from soot and gum Arabic, the scratch of styluses against papyrus has a rhythmic, meditative quality, like distant rain on a rooftop. These are the silent heroes of Alexandria, the human photocopiers of their time, meticulously copying texts by hand, sometimes multiple versions a day. You watch as one scribe slowly recreates a poem by Sappho. Each character is lovingly formed, each line a dance between precision and fatigue. Scholars still argue whether Alexandria ever held original versions of Greek classics or simply compiled the best available copies. Either way, the craftsmanship is breathtaking. One scribe lets out a soft sigh, flexing his hand. He leans back and dips his stylus into a shell of ink, revealing a funny detail. They sometimes used crushed beetles to make red pigment. That's right, color-coded annotations courtesy of the insect kingdom. On a nearby table sits a stack of damaged scrolls, torn edges, faded lines, the ghosts of knowledge in need of restoration. This room also doubles as a papyrus hospital. In one corner, a scholar delicately smooths a scroll, using a polished stone, whispering prayers, as though coaxing memory back into its rightful shape. You wonder whether scroll repair was more science or superstition, maybe both. Scholars still debate how much they truly understood about long-term preservation. Next to him, a cataloger labels a new acquisition, a scroll from distant India filled with mathematical theory and mysterious symbols. You imagine the journey it must have taken to get here across rivers, deserts, mountains, and hands. The librarian jots down its title in Greek, gently placing it beside works by Pythagoras and Euclid, as if the new arrival is just another neighbor in a very nerdy neighborhood. Further down, someone is experimenting with parchment, a newfangled idea made from animal skins rather than plant fibers. It's thicker, more durable, but expensive and controversial. One scribe mutters that it'll never catch on papyrus is classic. Another scribe with red-streaked hands from too many beetles grunts in disagreement. Historians still argue which material ultimately gave scribes more freedom. You're shown a wall covered in marginal notes, some cheeky, some cryptic. It seems ancient scribes had the same urge to doodle or editorialize as modern students. One comment simply reads, "Terribly dull. Author must have been asleep," a timeless critique. As you step back, the ambient hum of diligent copying feels like the heartbeat of the library. It's not glamorous, no thunderous applause or eureka moments, just slow, deliberate preservation. Knowledge here isn't shouted. It's whispered, traced in ink, and handed from one careful mind to another. You head back toward the central rotunda, your mind still lingering in that workshop of ink and discipline. You think about how many modern ideas owe their survival to those cramped rooms, those tired eyes, and those hands that never stopped writing even when the rest of the world forgot to listen. You emerge from the scroll-copying chamber with the soft scent of ink still clinging to your imagination. The rotunda ahead pulses gently with the footfalls of sandal-wearing scholars. You take a turn into a longer corridor, this one lined not with texts, but with people. These are the residents of the Mausion, the living brain trust of Alexandria. Now don't be fooled by the dreamy name. The Mausion wasn't just a museum in the modern sense. It was a full-blown academic commune, a place where scholars not only worked but ate, slept, argued, and occasionally got grumpy over philosophical footnotes. Funded by the Ptolemaic dynasty, these thinkers were granted state salaries, free housing, and the sweet luxury of uninterrupted curiosity. Imagine your job being just go figure stuff out. You'd either become a genius or lose your mind debating the number of atoms in cheese. You wander past open doorways and overhear arguments in half a dozen languages. Some are quarreling about geometry, others whispering about star charts, while a particularly passionate group is trying to decide whether Homer was one guy or a storytelling franchise. Historians still argue that last one too was Homer, a single poet or a mythic collective. One room smells faintly of oil and copper. You peek in to find a cluster of engineers tinkering with pulleys, levers, and what might be an early water pump. They're debating water pressure as if lives depend on it. One frustrated inventor has drawn an entire system on the wall with charcoal, ending in a doodle of a duck for scale. Fringe tidbit of the day, some Alexandrians built automata, little mechanical statues powered by steam or falling water. One supposedly flapped its wings when heated, because of course science is cooler when it's dramatic. You pass a table cluttered with half-finished experiments, scrolls, jars of dried herbs, and something that looks suspiciously like burnt toast. A physician scholar, one of Herophilus's descendants in intellectual spirit, murmurs about nerve pathways and eye anatomy while eating a fig. You don't want to know if the fig is a visual aid or just a snack. It's best not to ask. Farther down, the conversation turns astrological. A Chaldean scholar draws celestial paths in sand, explaining to a curious onlooker how the stars might influence the human liver. You nod politely and inch away. The blend of medicine and mysticism was strong here, and, let's just say, scientific rigor still had a long walk ahead of it. You duck into a shaded portico where scholars gather for outdoor debate. This is where reputations are made and broken often before lunch. One bold young philosopher launches into a monologue about the shape of the universe, claiming it must be a giant sphere wrapped in fire. An older scholar raises one eyebrow and counters, "If so, then where does it go at night?" The laughter is warm but sharp-edged. You settle on a stone bench listening to the murmur of layered conversations and the occasional clink of ceramic cups. It's like a caffeinated TED Talk with sandals. You can practically feel ideas overlapping and colliding the way static jumps between fingertips on a dry day. The air here is charged not with lightning but with logic. A portly older man walks by holding a fish and quoting Aristotle. He might be lunch-bound or mid-experiment, it's hard to tell. At the Museon, the line between practical and theoretical is often hilariously thin. You half expect someone to drop a scroll and shout Eureka just for dramatic effect. And despite the intellectual weight in the air, there's a strange comfort in how ordinary it all is. There's grumbling over who left olive pits on the steps. There's that one guy who insists he's almost discovered a new element if only the rats would stop eating his samples. And then there's the woman furiously transcribing notes with her hair tied up in reeds. You briefly consider trying that look. Maybe it'd help you focus. The Museon isn't a frozen archive. It's a messy, breathing network of minds. You can almost hear the slow hum of cumulative knowledge growing louder with every experiment, mistake, and wild idea. The way ivy clings to stone over time, their thoughts slowly wrap around the world, reshaping it from the inside out. You rise from your bench, stretching the stiffness from your legs, and wonder how many breakthroughs were born in places like this, not in moments of revelation, but in conversations half remembered, in diagrams drawn on napkins, or in arguments about whether wind has mass. Maybe, just maybe, the path to wisdom is more winding and more wonderfully absurd than we like to admit. Your sandals press softly against worn tiles as you veer off into a quieter wing of the Museon, where a different kind of study takes place, less shouting about the cosmos, more whispering about syntax. Here, among the scroll-laden walls, you find the philologists, the word lovers, the grammar obsessives, the people who argue at length about the placement of a single comma in a poem written 500 years ago. The hallway smells faintly of papyrus and ink. You enter a small chamber where a man with a permanently furrowed brow is hunched over a massive scroll. He's reading aloud in a sing-song voice, stopping occasionally to groan. No, the meter's off. Who wrote this garbage?" he mutters before realizing it's a draft of his own. This is the domain of people like Xenodotus and later Aristarchus of Samothrace, names you might not recognize, but without whom you might still think Odyssey refers to a Toyota. These early scholars were responsible for organizing, editing, and standardizing texts. They're the reason we even know what ancient literature sounds like. They invented the footnote, basically. Sorry. One mainstream historical fact: Aristarchus pioneered critical editions of Homer's epics, marking suspect verses with little symbols to signal possible interpolations or errors. You can picture him, stylus in hand, muttering, "Nice try, anonymous scribe from 300 BC, but I'm on to you." As you wander farther in, the conversation turns to dictionaries. A few scholars are compiling lexicons of rare words used by Hesiod Sappho, and some dude named Euphorion who only wrote about frogs for some reason. You see one man surrounded by scrolls labeled age-old and wonder if he's regretting life choices. Another is knee-deep in etymologies of words for sneeze. It's glorious. On one low bench, a sleepy assistant is tasked with sorting two nearly identical versions of the same tragedy. One scroll includes a line about a goat, the other does not. A debate ensues about the symbolic weight of goats in Athenian ritual. It goes on for a while, like too long. Historians still argue whether some of these edits reflect authorial intent or just enthusiastic scribes who had opinions and quills. The air is heavy with words, literally. Scrolls lean against every surface, curling like dried leaves. Some are wrapped in red-dyed thread, signaling their importance. Others are clearly practice runs, messy, smudged, and doodled in the margins, with tiny ships or dogs. You feel a kinship with whoever drew those. Proof that even the greatest centers of knowledge had moments of, meh, I'll just sketch a cat. You pass a shelf, where some philosophical texts are arranged by author, and others by theme, like an ancient version of Recommended for You. Stoicism next to Epicureanism, because why not stir the pot? One particularly meticulous shelf has been labeled, in case of plague, read these. Cheery. Down another corridor you find a makeshift classroom. A teacher gestures with a reed stylus, explaining rhetorical devices to a group of semi-attentive students. Anaphora he chants. When you repeat the beginning of a sentence again and again, to sound wise again and again. One student stifles a yawn. Another is writing something that looks suspiciously like a love poem, poorly disguised as homework. Kids. A quirky tidbit, some scrolls in the library were bilingual, or even trilingual, written in Greek, Demotic Egyptian, and occasionally a dash of Phoenician. Multilingual scribes were rare gems, and they were often bribed with extra rations of wine and olives. One note scratched in the margin reads, "Better than barley. Keep talking." Your stroll brings you to a small open-air courtyard. A few students are sitting cross-legged discussing whether Plato plagiarized Pythagoras or just borrowed with flair. Their instructor gently reminds them that the point is to understand ideas, not assign copyright infringement in a preprint world. You sip some water from a clay cup and feel the sun trace its arc overhead. Despite the dry air, there's something fluid about this whole place. Knowledge here flows sideways as often as forward. Debates loop back on themselves. Ideas stretch like warm dough, and always in the background the soft rustle of scrolls being rolled, unrolled, or tossed aside in frustration. One elderly grammarian walks by, holding a parchment with a look of sheer panic. "I think I just found a lost play of Euripides," he says breathlessly. His colleague squints and replies, "Nope, that's your grocery list from yesterday. You need more olives." The moment passes. They chuckle. You do too. And that's the beauty of it, this blend of reverence and ridiculousness, of sacred texts and silly mistakes, of scholars so deep in thought they forget to eat and then shout poetic metaphors at their soup when they finally do. You lean back against a column watching the clouds drift past and wonder what tiny word might change everything when someone finally reads it just right. The afternoon sunlight angles just so through the high slits in the outer walls, painting golden bands across the library's marble floors. Your feet glide along cool stone now, and the air shifts. The scent of dusted parchment gives way to something richer, beeswax ink, and a strange floral note that might be imported cedar. You've wandered into the scriptorium. Not quite a copying room, not quite a sanctuary. It hums with focus. This is where replication happens, the long, patient birth of a scroll into its twin. You watch as scribes, mostly young, mostly cross-eyed, lean over their desks like swans nesting. Their quills twitch with precision. The only sounds are the faint scrape of reed on papyrus and the occasional muttered expletive when someone spills ink or forgets where they were mid-sentence. Again, you edge past a large table where a senior copyist is inspecting a newly finished version of Herodotus. He squints, murmurs, then blows lightly on the drying letters. You expect a nod of satisfaction. Instead, he grabs a razor and starts scraping off an entire line. "That's not how you spell ekbatna," he grumbles. "You feel this deep in your soul." One mainstream historical fact: professional scribes in Alexandria were often state-sponsored, employed to mass-produce scrolls for diplomatic exchange, temple archives, or the library itself. The idea of copyright didn't exist, but intellectual flexing absolutely did. Imagine being asked to recopy an entire book you hate, say, a 1,000-line poem about grain measurement. Now imagine doing it 27 times. Welcome to Tuesday. Historians still argue whether these scribes worked from dictation, copying aloud in small groups, or silently from master scrolls. Either way, eye strain was guaranteed. There's some evidence of specialized roles too: ink grinders, quill trimmers, and even punctuation editors. Yes, ancient punctuation editors. Proof that passive aggression is truly eternal. You stop beside a large amphora of ink. It's black as pitch and smells faintly of metal and myrrh. A student dips his pen too deep, and a fat blot stains his scroll. He looks around. No one notices. He folds the parchment with alarming nonchalance and walks away. Somewhere, a tiny part of history just evaporated. Oops. A quirky detail catches your attention on a nearby table. Tiny weights made of bronze shaped like animals: an owl, a snake, a goat. They hold down unruly scrolls while their owners copy away. The owl stares at you as if to say, "Don't let your margins slip." You nod respectfully. You wander past a niche where illuminators work not in gold leaf. That's more of a medieval thing, but with pigments made from crushed lapis lazuli and saffron used to color the headings or mark special passages. You spot a fragment where someone has lovingly drawn a sea monster in the corner of a map. It's mostly teeth and enthusiasm. One scribe has what looks like a checklist beside his scroll. 1. Title. 2. Author. 3. Year, if known. 4. Don't mess up like last time. You appreciate the self-awareness. As you move deeper into the room, the lighting dims, not by accident, but by design. Some texts are delicate, fragile papyri, centuries old, curled and sepia-toned, like baked leaves. They're kept under protective cloth, occasionally aired out, and read only with gloved fingers. A copyist whispers as he works, "This was Aristotle's maybe." Historians still argue whether any original Aristotle manuscripts ever made it to Alexandria, or if these are just very enthusiastic reprints. You pause near a wall lined with cubbies, each filled with half-transcribed works. Little notes tucked in Finnish before solstice. Ask if this is Greek or gibberish, and one that simply says, "Not again." You get the impression that humor, like ink, was always in supply. You sit briefly at one of the empty desks. The surface is smooth, worn by generations of scribes. You imagine what it would feel like to spend your days here copying, annotating, sometimes cursing your handwriting, other times marveling at the elegance of someone else's phrase. It's a strange kind of immortality, isn't it? Not writing something new, but making sure old words survive. A wind passes gently through a nearby opening in the wall, fluttering a sheet of papyrus. It trembles like it knows it's important. You resist the urge to touch it. You're here to observe, not to meddle. At the edge of the room, a young apprentice recites a list of Egyptian deities in Greek. He keeps stumbling over Khnum. A more experienced scribe gently corrects him, then tells a long-winded story about a time he accidentally called the crocodile god Fish Face in front of a priest. They laugh. You chuckle. Somewhere Sobek stirs. Another odd little fact some scribes left behind: doodles of themselves, tiny sketches in the margins, showing a hunched figure glaring at a scroll. A kind of ancient signature, except instead of best wishes, it's more like, "Kill me. This is my 58th Plato." Before you leave the scriptorium, you spot a small shrine in the corner. Just a simple oil lamp burning beside a statue of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing. Someone's left an offering, a coin, a feather, and what looks suspiciously like a half-eaten fig. Hey, even divine patrons deserve snacks. You step back into the corridor, eyes blinking at the brighter light. The murmur of voices fades as the door closes behind you. What they're doing in there is more than copying, it's translating time one sentence at a time. You walk on feeling just a little more reverent. The corridor you follow now leads toward a different part of the library complex, one quieter if that's even possible and colder somehow. There's a dampness here, a change in the stone underfoot. You realize you're descending slightly, following a ramp or perhaps a long, shallow staircase worn smooth by centuries of sandals, bare feet, and the occasional hurried philosopher. It smells less like ink here and more like clay linen and something musky. Scroll storage. You find yourself in the archives, not the curated halls where the most celebrated scrolls are displayed, but the belly of the beast, the storage vaults. Here, the walls are lined not with bookshelves, but with deep wooden pigeonholes stacked from floor to ceiling. Most are filled with carefully rolled scrolls, bound with colored thread, or tucked into terracotta containers like ancient baguettes. Some are labeled. Many aren't. You have the sudden thought that you could be standing in front of the only remaining copy of something profound, and no one would ever know. History's greatest game of hide and seek. You pull one scroll gently from its cubbyhole. The tag reads, "On the proper care of goats." The script is faded but tidy. There's even a little drawing of a goat wearing a bell. Is it a serious work? A joke, a student's side project, you'll never know. But it exists, and that feels like enough. Mainstream historical fact. At its peak, the Library of Alexandria may have held between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, though historians still argue whether that number includes duplicates, translations, and less formal works. Some estimate it was even fewer, some more. Either way, you're currently standing among tens of thousands of human thoughts, stacked like loaves of bread waiting to be tasted. There's no Dewey Decimal System here, but there was order. The library staff used a system devised by Callimachus, a poet and scholar who created a 120-volume catalog called the Pinakes. It organized works by subject and author. Of course, none of those volumes survived. Irony deeply, yes. You brush past a stack marked Drama Misc and one labeled Medical Opinions Disputed. That one feels spicy. You imagine ancient physicians arguing about whether or not you should bleed someone on a Tuesday. Spoiler, the answer was always probably. You pass a low alcove where a table has been set up for scroll repair. A woman sits with what looks like a flattened sponge and a strip of papyrus so fragile she moves like she's diffusing a bomb. She lifts a corner of the page with a fishbone, a literal fishbone. You don't ask. A quirky tidbit catches your eye nearby, a scroll box carved from ivory with dancing figures etched along the lid. You lift it slightly, it's heavier than expected. Inside is a scroll wrapped in silk. The label reads, "Dream Interpretations by Artemidorus." You grin. Sleepy ancient minds asking, what does it mean if I dream of fish? That sing historians still argue whether these texts were consulted seriously or read like party tricks. Either way, you kind of want a copy for your nightstand. The room darkens slightly as a cloud moves over the skylight. You glance upward. These vaults had limited windows mostly to avoid sun damage to the papyri. Instead, clay lamps provided the primary light, though there's no open flame here now. Just your imagination and a flicker of warmth from long-ago hands that lit these spaces. You wonder if librarians in Alexandria ever got lost down here. The kind of lost where you find a manuscript on Babylonian gardening tips and emerge 3 days later hungry, dazed, but weirdly passionate about lentils. Some scrolls were never found again, buried under layers of new acquisitions, forgotten when scribes moved sections or when political regimes changed. Even knowledge has its tides. As you circle another row of cubbies, you stumble upon a small curtained alcove. Pulling it gently aside, you discover something unusual, a collection of scrolls that look worn from handling. These were beloved, used frequently. You spot titles on astronomy, geometry, legal codes, and one oddly titled On the Qualities of Silence. You pause on that one. A whole treatise about silence resting in the quietest place in the world. Poetic. Next to it is another scroll with no title but a seal. You recognize the symbol of Isis. You wonder if this was theological, mythological, or perhaps a bit of both. Ancient texts didn't always draw those lines cleanly. Spirituality was braided into science like strands of hair in a priest's wig. Near the exit of the archive, there's a long bench made from old timber, worn cracked but still solid. Someone carved a message into its surface centuries ago. You trace the faint letters, "I stayed too long." Underneath, in a different hand, "Worth it," a sentiment every bookworm understands. Your sandals click again on the stone floor as you move toward the back wall. It's lined with clay tablets, older than the scrolls. Babylonian cuneiforms, Sumerian ledgers, even one Egyptian stela tucked awkwardly at the end. It's like the staff didn't want to throw it out, but also didn't know where else to put it. You run your fingers lightly across one tablet, hard as rock, rough as memory. You spot a discarded reed pen resting on a shelf. Someone probably meant to come back for it. Maybe they were interrupted. Maybe they got promoted to catalog duty upstairs. Maybe they just got bored and went out for olives. No one will ever know, but the pen waits still. You feel time in your shoulders down here, the weight of it. All these words, written with hope, read with care, forgotten, remembered, debated, then lost again. Not everything survives, but enough has. Enough to walk these silent rows and feel a flicker of what Alexandria once breathed. You exhale and rise slowly, brushing the dust from your hands. The scrolls don't say goodbye, but they never really say goodbye, do they? You leave the archives with a breath that feels just a little heavier, as though the dust of forgotten knowledge has lodged itself somewhere behind your ribs. The air outside that chamber feels warmer, though maybe that's just your body reminding you that the living prefer sunlight and motion. The corridor ahead bends and widens, and soon you emerge into another grand hall, this one less austere than the scriptoria or scroll vaults. There's color here, mosaic floors and geometric patterns, splashes of faded paint clinging to columns, and tall open windows letting in bright slants of Mediterranean light. This, you realize, is where scholars gather, not to copy or sort or count, but to talk. The heart of intellectual Alexandria isn't its shelves, it's this open space filled with murmuring voices, flicking hands, raised brows, and cups of wine left half drunk on the edges of scroll trays. You're in a conversation court, the philosopher's lounge, possibly the world's first very serious coffee shop vibe. You slide onto a stone bench that curves along one wall and lean back to take in the scene. To your left, two scholars are deeply engaged in a debate about the structure of the cosmos, whether stars are fixed in crystal spheres or hung like lamps from some vast dome. One gestures wildly with a papyrus scroll, nearly hitting a nearby cat, who is, of course, completely unbothered. The cat is in fact licking olives from someone's unattended dish like it owns the place. Which it does, probably. You learn through quiet eavesdropping that these debate circles were a daily occurrence. Mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a place to store knowledge, it was a place to generate it. Scholars from all over the Hellenistic world came here to research, collaborate, and argue until someone's voice cracked. Historians still argue whether this informal debate format influenced later academic traditions like the Roman rhetorical schools or the much later European salons. One man pacing in bare feet with ink-stained fingers insists that numbers have personalities. 7 is a trickster, he says, absolutely serious. You cannot trust it. His colleague nods slowly and scribbles a note. You don't even know if this is math, theology, or poetry. You just accept it. Alexandria logic. Nearby, a woman cradles a basket of scrolls like they're kittens and recites from one of them some early dramatic work, you guess. The rhythm of her voice is hypnotic. She's not reading, she's performing. You glance around and notice a few listeners pausing to watch, one even leaning in with a half-eaten fig still in hand. This is knowledge as theater. You suspect this woman might be a student of Hypatia, or maybe even Hypatia herself. Historians still argue whether women were common in these scholarly circles or exceptions to a rule no one ever fully defined. A faint breeze curls through the colonnade, lifting the edge of a dropped papyrus sheet. You pin it gently with your sandal before it can scurry off like a rebellious leaf. The script looks like verse, probably unfinished, or maybe abandoned. Even genius forgets its lunch sometimes. You walk through the courtyard, noting the architectural details. Corinthian capitals on the columns, floral patterns chipped from age, and a faint gold edging that still clings to the ceiling's underside. Someone clearly cared about this space. It wasn't just practical, it was aspirational. The dream of a world where knowledge wasn't just preserved, but celebrated, where you could lose track of time chasing an idea around a column like a moth around a lamp. In the corner is a chalkboard-like surface slate, perhaps smudged with equations. You can't read them, but the frantic scrawl suggests excitement or panic, possibly both. You remember that ancient scholars didn't separate disciplines the way modern academia does. Mathematics, astronomy, music, and metaphysics were all part of the same conversation. If the stars sang, someone in Alexandria tried to write down the melody. A quirky discovery waits on the far wall, a small shelf where scholars have left their personal messages. Carved in various scripts are things like, Zeno was here, don't borrow my stylus again, and cryptically, we are made of fire and sleep. One scribe has drawn a very tired-looking owl. You instantly relate. You sit again for a while just listening. Greek mixes with Egyptian, with Aramaic, with a language you don't recognize. Alexandria was a multilingual city, and the library was no different. Historians still argue whether scrolls were always translated or whether readers were simply expected to figure it out. Either way, there's something comforting about the sound of human voices engaged in useless but beautiful conversation. Someone bumps your shoulder gently, an older man in a blue robe balancing a tray of cups. He mumbles an apology and offers you one. You take it. The drink is herbal, earthy, with a hint of something bitter and citrusy. Ancient energy drink, possibly. You feel a little more awake, but still dreamlike. You lean back again and close your eyes just for a second. In your mind's eye, the conversations continue, soft, layered, rhythmic like ocean waves. Philosophy as lullaby. You wonder how many ideas were born here in this glow of sunlight and ink and curiosity, and how many drifted off mid-thought, forgotten like dreams before breakfast. You stay like that a long while until the court begins to empty. Scrolls are gathered, conversations dissolve, and even the cat finally abandons the olives. You follow the scent of fresh air and leave the courtyard slowly, as though to exit too quickly might disturb the ghosts of arguments not yet finished. Outside, the world is still bright, but your pace has slowed. Alexandria moves at its own speed, one foot in history, one in imagination. You're not quite sure which part you're walking through anymore, but you're still walking. That's enough. The sound of sandals on stone echoes softly as you continue your slow walk deeper into the intellectual labyrinth. Around a bend, a gentle hush settles like a layer of silk. You step into a quieter space now, somewhere between temple and study, or maybe something more unusual. There's a noticeable shift in energy. No more heated debates or dramatic recitations here, just the soft scratch of styluses, the whisper of scrolls being unrolled, and an occasional sigh. This is the scholar's sanctuary. A reading hall, you guess, but it's more than that. You've entered a chamber designed not just for absorbing information, but for contemplating it. The walls are lined with cedar shelves, stacked high with scrolls, some bundled in colored ribbons to mark subjects, mathematics in blue, poetry in red, medical treatises tied in green. It's a color-coded rainbow of ancient wisdom. And yes, somewhere in there is probably a scroll titled something like How to Remove Leeches Properly Volume 7. You pick one up at random, a scroll thicker than your forearm, its edges worn from many rereadings. The script is in Greek, the title translating to something like On the Movement of Birds in Wind. It's speculative, poetic even. The author suggests that birds know secrets about wind currents because they were born into the sky. You are not sure whether it's science metaphor or a sleep-deprived philosopher's field notes. Maybe all three. A cough echoes from the other side of the room. You look over and see a man hunched over a scroll, surrounded by a fortress of cushions and weighted down with multiple ink-stained robes. He's asleep, totally out. One sandal has fallen off. A half-written note still curls from someone's fingers. Honestly, mood. You lower yourself onto one of the empty benches and it creaks ever so slightly. The room smells like beeswax old parchment, and the faintest whiff of mint. Someone must be chewing a leaf to stay awake. There's no natural light here. The glow comes from carefully placed oil lamps suspended in bronze holders that sway slightly when someone walks past. Shadows dance on the ceiling in slow, lazy circles. Mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria wasn't a single structure. It was a complex, possibly connected to the Mouseion, a kind of Temple Academy hybrid dedicated to the Muses. Historians still argue whether these reading chambers were part of the Mouseion proper or simply aligned with its mission. But either way, the result was a strange and beautiful fusion. Religious reverence meets scientific inquiry. Someone nearby sneezes. A woman in an ochre tunic grumbles something that sounds suspiciously like an ancient version of bless you, but shh. She returns to her scroll, tapping her stylus like a metronome. It's strangely comforting, that rhythm, like the ticking of a clock if clocks had existed yet. You drift over to another corner where two apprentices are trying to copy diagrams. One looks up at you and smiles, proud of a very shaky drawing of what appears to be a liver, or possibly a fig. Scholars back then didn't just read, they illustrated mapped, charted, scribbled margins, and occasionally doodled embarrassing caricatures of their mentors, which we totally still find in the margins, by the way. One fringe tidbit. Some scrolls recovered from similar libraries include weird little personal notes like, "This was boring," or "Do not trust my uncle's math." Some things never change. A teacher at the far end of the room speaks softly to a cluster of students. His voice low but animated. He's talking about something called pneuma, the breath of life, or spirit, or possibly just the stuff between atoms. You can't quite catch all of it, but it sounds like a precursor to chemistry or maybe philosophy wearing a lab coat. Historians still argue whether these proto-scientific ideas ever made their way into medicine or just stayed as fascinating theories to pass the time while waiting for figs to ripen. The air is warmer here and stiller. You lean your head back and let your eyes blur. You imagine what this place might have felt like in its prime, every scroll perfectly ordered, every scholar deep in thought, the constant motion of knowledge being not just preserved, but pondered. It was a slow-moving current of ideas, not a rushing river. The pace of insight here was measured in quiet heartbeats and deep, deliberate breaths. You pause to consider the absurd magnitude of it all. The Library of Alexandria may have held up to 400,000 scrolls, though of course historians still argue whether that number is myth metaphor or wildly optimistic cataloging. But let's pretend for a moment it's true. Imagine that weight, that density, that belief in the written word's power to build a better world, or at least to win arguments. You wonder how they handled overflow. Did they run out of shelf space and start stacking scrolls like unruly baguettes in corners? Was there a lost and found scroll bin? Did someone ever check out a scroll and just never bring it back? Claiming I swear I left it by the door somewhere in Alexandria, there must have been a very stressed librarian sighing over another incomplete return form written on a shard of pottery. The lamps flicker a little and the quiet grows deeper. A few scholars begin to stretch. Scrolls are re-rolled, bound, stacked neatly with care. You stand moving gently among the benches, passing under carved lintels etched with tiny phrases, quotations from Plato, Thales, and Sappho, along with one anonymous gem that reads, "Simply read again." You missed something. Touché. As you step out of the reading hall, the light shifts once more. Alexandria is layered in these spaces, bright, chatty, dusty, serene. This quiet sanctuary felt like the pause between notes in a symphony, the place where understanding finally settles. Your footsteps echo again in the corridor, soft but steady. You're not walking toward something now. You're walking with something, carrying the silence, the ideas, the questions, and the scent of ink on your skin. And ahead, there are more rooms, more scrolls, more cats, obviously. Your path turns again, and the corridor gently slopes downward, the air cooling with every step. You follow a line of shallow lamps that sputter softly like they're whispering secrets to one another. The sandstone walls grow smoother here, less crowded with scroll storage and more adorned with murals, faded blues and rusty reds forming patterns that once probably told a coherent story. Now it's more of a visual shrug. Still pretty, though. You step into a large, vaulted room where the acoustics catch your breath and toss it back to you a half-second later. This is where scholars gathered for what might be called symposiums, or maybe more accurately, super nerdy dinner parties. No food here tonight, just lingering echoes and polished benches arranged in half-moons. You run your fingers across a stone ledge, feeling the shallow indentations where countless elbows have rested. Some of them probably bored out of their minds, others feverishly scribbling notes, a few just doodling cats. A podium stands in the center, modest and worn like the academic version of a battlefield. This is where ideas were launched like philosophical grenades. You can almost hear it now, a scholar clearing his throat before challenging Aristotle on logic, or proposing a new planetary model that has Earth spinning like a top. Historians still argue whether public debates here were formal or more of a shouting contest where someone always brought wine. Tonight, the room is still, but in your mind, you reconstruct the crowd. Dozens of robed thinkers sitting cross-legged or reclining on low cushions, mumbling responses under their breath. Someone in the back tries to take notes on their knee and ends up with ink on their shin. Another dramatically sighs and mutters, "That's not how Socrates would have put it," for the 50th time. The smell is probably some unholy blend of olive oil, goat cheese, and ego. Mainstream historical fact. The library wasn't just a place to store scrolls. It was an active research institution. Scholars from all over the Hellenistic world were invited to live, write, teach, and debate here. Think of it as the ancient version of a fellowship program, except instead of email threads and conference name tags, you had handwritten papyri and aggressively judgmental owls. In a corner of the hall, there's a strange sight, what looks like a globe. Not quite spherical, more like a wireframe onion. Metal hoops intersect, marking the paths of celestial bodies. A model of the heavens, or at least someone's best guess. Fringe tidbit. A scholar named Eratosthenes, who once served as chief librarian, calculated the Earth's circumference using just shadows and a stick, and he got surprisingly close. You can almost hear him explaining it, in this very room, pointing at a diagram with a reed pen, while someone in the front row mutters, "That can't be right, the Earth's flat, wait, no round, wait." The lamps flicker a little brighter here, and the echo fades. The sound is swallowed by the soft curves of the ceiling, designed not just for beauty, but for acoustics. They wanted to hear the ideas clearly and completely, and maybe amplify the occasional dramatic mic drop or stylus drop. You wander behind the podium, standing in the place where some of the most radical ideas of the ancient world might have been spoken aloud for the first time. Someone probably proposed heliocentrism here centuries before it stuck. Another might have speculated about atoms or the nature of time or whether plants can feel pain. That last one might have been a joke, but still, you sit on one of the benches and imagine being in the audience watching two scholars go back and forth about the origin of tides. One insists it's the moon's doing, the other claims it's Poseidon's mood swings. A third casually chimes in that it's actually related to the divine breath of Gaia. And someone else just raises their hand to ask if anyone brought figs. Historians still argue whether any of these debates were formally recorded or whether the knowledge passed on was as much oral as it was written. What's certain is that these conversations shaped how knowledge flowed, not just preserved it, but kept it in motion. Every theory sparked a dozen more. Every disagreement fertilized the soil for some future scientist's eureka moment. The room feels warmer now, as if those old debates are still swirling in the air. You stand and stretch your joints, clicking in protest, and move toward a side alcove. It's lined with stools, each one slightly different in height. A chalky black wall rises behind them, marked faintly with grids and faded shapes. A kind of primitive whiteboard, maybe. You resist the urge to doodle a smiley face. You reach into a basket left nearby and find a few old styluses, their ends worn down from use. One has tiny carving stars of fish, and what you're 99% sure is a banana. Could be symbolic. Could just be someone bored out of their skull during a long seminar. Either way, it's comforting. Even in a temple of intellect, humans found time for doodles. You lean back against the stone wall and take a deep breath. The air here is different, not fresher, but smarter somehow, as though the dust itself has read more than you ever will. It's humbling in the best possible way. You imagine being one of them, a visiting scholar from some distant Greek island, fresh off a ship, overwhelmed by the size of the library and the sheer amount of information humming in its walls. You spend your days debating celestial mechanics, and your nights copying manuscripts by lamplight. Your fingers are stained with ink, your brain is swimming in ideas, and your sandals are absolutely falling apart. But you wouldn't trade it for anything. As you exit the lecture hall, you hear distant voices, again real ones this time. A group of students passing by, giggling quietly, their arms full of scrolls and their minds full of questions. You step aside and let them pass, the sound of their footsteps blending into the soft rhythm of the hallway. This place doesn't just teach, it lingers. It wraps around you like a favorite thought, one you can't quite put into words, but feel in your bones. And even though most of its scrolls are long lost, its spirit, this hunger for understanding, still lingers quiet and eternal. You keep walking now, drawn by the faint sound of trickling water, an odd thing to hear indoors, but not unexpected in a space as carefully curated as this. The hallway bends to the left, and you find yourself in a small courtyard tucked deep inside the complex. A gentle fountain sits at its center, surrounded by low marble benches sunken slightly into the floor, as if this whole spot was designed for people who needed a breather from the relentless thinking. You settle down at the edge of the fountain, listening to the rhythmic plink of droplets as they hit the shallow pool. The courtyard is open to the sky, framed by tall columns draped in ivy, an intentional invitation for the natural world to mix with the intellectual. A breeze stirs, carrying the scent of herbs planted along the walls, lavender, thyme, maybe a few stalks of what smells suspiciously like ancient mint. Someone had the bright idea of blending academia with aromatherapy. 10 out of 10. You can picture the library's scribes taking their midday break here, blinking in the sunlight like overly sensitive cave dwellers. One of them lies flat on the stone, mumbling about papyrus fatigue. Another leans against a pillar, reciting a new poem to nobody in particular. and one is clearly pretending to nap while eavesdropping on the others. Mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just one building. It was more like a campus, temples, lecture halls, gardens, residential quarters. Some call it the world's first research university, and it had the vibes to match stressed-out scholars, awkward social mixers, and more scrolls than anyone could realistically read in a lifetime. You glance up, and there's a carved frieze near the top of one wall. It shows stylized owls, big eyes, tidy feathers, slightly disapproving expressions. Maybe it was the mascot. Maybe it was just trendy. Historians still argue whether the owl motif was symbolic of wisdom or simply copied from Greek coins floating around at the time. Either way, they're watching you, silently judging your slow reading pace. One quirky detail catches your attention: a sundial mounted vertically with a little bronze lizard perched at the top. As the sun moves, the lizard casts a shadow on the engraved hours, and for a second you wonder if someone gave that thing a name. Probably something like Scaly McTimeface. Back in the courtyard, a small door sits half hidden behind some shrubs. You approach and open it cautiously, revealing a narrow corridor that leads into the scribe's quarters. The air thickens again, warmer, dustier, with a hint of something charred. Ink, burnt oil. It smells like deadlines. You step into a long room where rows of low tables line the floor, each one strewn with scraps of papyrus, inkpots, reed pens, and the occasional half-finished doodle of what you think is a camel playing the lute. Maybe it was a bet. Maybe it was boredom. You'll never know. The scribes were the human hard drives of this place. Their job was both simple and exhausting: copy, copy, copy. Translate, cross-reference, double-check, repeat. No Ctrl+C, no backspace, and definitely no spell check. If you misspelled something, congratulations. It's now part of history. Unless, of course, your supervisor caught it, in which case, welcome to being glared at for 40 minutes. You walk past one desk with a small oil lamp still flickering low. The wax is nearly gone, but someone must have lit it recently. Or maybe it's just been burning for 2,000 years, waiting for you to notice. A poetic thought. You lean over and spot a scroll halfway unrolled. It's a text on geometry, neatly scribed with diagrams drawn in red ink. There's a note scribbled in the margins. Better explanation on page 7. You smile. Even geniuses left passive-aggressive notes to themselves. In the corner, a storage niche holds jars of ink, arranged by color. Black for everyday writing, red for emphasis, gold rarely used, probably reserved for royalty or particularly juicy gossip. You lift one jar carefully and feel its surprising weight. The lid is sealed with wax, the symbol of a crescent moon etched into the top. It could be anything: a poetic verse, a royal decree, or just someone's daily planner. Feed cat, copy Homer, try not to cry. Fringe tidbit. There's a theory that the scribes sometimes made error scrolls copies with intentional mistakes used to test apprentices, or thrown into circulation as decoys to catch plagiarists. It's like slipping a fake phone number to someone at a party, but way more passive-aggressive and in ancient Greek. A window near the ceiling lets in soft sunlight. Dust particles float through the beam, lazily swirling like they're too tired to settle. You watch them dance, feeling time slow down. It's easy to forget how much labor went into preserving knowledge here. Every scroll was copied by hand. Every correction took a steady hand and a patient heart. No cloud backup, just human willpower. You pause at another table where a leather-bound codex rests beside a curved blade likely used to scrape away errors. The codex is unfinished, half the text missing, but someone had started sketching a constellation across the edge of the page. It wraps around the border like a protective charm. The stars are labeled in Greek, but you recognize Orion. Even then, people were looking up, wondering about the same. Historians still argue whether most of the library's scribes were slaves, apprentices, or highly respected professionals. The answer's probably all three, depending on time and social class. Some may have been captured scholars brought from abroad to copy works in their native languages. Others volunteered, lured by the prestige. And some just wanted to read everything before anyone else. Honestly, same. You rest your hand on the table, and for a moment you pretend to be one of them. Bent over your work, your pen squeaking softly as you trace a perfect curve. The lamp flickers beside you. The deadline looms. But for now, the only thing that matters is this sentence, this word, this letter. Back out in the courtyard, the light has shifted. The sundial lizard now casts its shadow toward late afternoon. You hear birds chirping faintly from the roof, and something flutters by, maybe a leaf, maybe a scrap of papyrus escaping a rewrite. You let it go. The breeze knows what it's doing. The library lives not just in what was written, but in the hands that wrote it. In the sweat on their brows, the squint in their eyes, the quiet satisfaction of a finished scroll. And in this peaceful, ivy-draped courtyard, that spirit lingers still. The sun's angle lowers just a touch more, and you rise slowly from the bench by the courtyard fountain, stretching like you've been the one copying scrolls all day. Back through the narrow doorway, you wander deeper into the quiet halls, where the soft shuffle of your sandals echoes like a monk humming to himself after dinner. You pass a few closed wooden doors rooms that might have held private collections or perhaps just storage for parchment and herbs. It's impossible to say, and the mystery only adds to the charm. Eventually, you reach a long columned corridor, one side open to a colonnade that overlooks the harbor. Yes, the harbor. It suddenly strikes you how close you are to the sea. The famous port of Alexandria lies just beyond the tiled railing, its salty breeze sneaking in like it has a library card. You breathe it in, warm, a little fishy, but soothing like an old story told 100 times. From here you can see distant outlines of ships bobbing in the water, merchant vessels with curved hulls and tall sails, likely stuffed with papyrus rolls, amphorae, or salted fish. One has a painted eye on its prow, watching the horizon with a mild sense of judgment, as if to say, "You forgot your deadline. Again, didn't you?" It's no accident that the library was so close to the harbor. Mainstream historical fact part of the library's collection strategy involved intercepting books from incoming ships. Officials would borrow scrolls from visiting traders, make copies, and if they were feeling cheeky, keep the originals while returning the copies. Imagine checking your bags at customs and never getting your ancient romance novel back. Brutal. You linger at the open-air corridor, watching waves shimmer in the distance. Somewhere below, dock workers shout over crates, gulls wheel in slow looping arcs, and a temple bell rings with a hollow metallic calm. And time folds a little here. Past and present blend. You almost expect a scholar in sandals to walk by, munching on a fig and mumbling about Aristotle's latest hot take. Back inside, your feet take you toward a part of the building that feels older, more sacred somehow. The air cools again. How does that keep happening and the walls grow darker? Here, the murals are richer in tone, the architecture a little more ornate. You've found the Hall of Memory, or at least that's what the small inscription above the archway suggests. It's written in Greek, but someone left a rough Latin translation scrawled below it to know what has been. Inside, the room opens like a vaulted chapel. The ceiling is high, the acoustics soft and cloistered. Rows of niches line the walls, each one holding a scroll encased in glass or clay. A few are cracked. Some are sealed in resin. All are carefully labeled. These, you realize, must be the original's rare scrolls deemed too valuable to circulate. Maybe the actual works of Herodotus Euclid or even Sappho. You blink, knowing full well you'll never know. One scroll catches your eye. It's been rolled around a spindle of what looks like ivory, though it's more likely polished bone. At its base sits a figurine, tiny humanoid carved from dark stone. It's holding a stylus, its face blank. A guardian, perhaps, or just a very serious paperweight. Historians still argue whether these miniature statues were symbolic, ritualistic, or just decorative desk flair? Probably all three. Human nature doesn't change that much. You lean in to read the plaque beside another scroll. It's attributed to Hypatia, yes, that Hypatia, the legendary philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer of Alexandria. Her name shines through the dust like a lighthouse. There's no actual proof this is her handwriting, of course. Most of her works were destroyed, scattered, or absorbed into later texts, but this one has annotations in the margins, elegant and urgent, like someone thinking faster than they could write. Fringe tidbit. There's a persistent, though highly debatable, theory that Hypatia kept a secret stash of scrolls, hidden in a private alcove of the library, possibly protected by sympathetic priests or even buried beneath the foundations. It's a romantic notion, like imagining Da Vinci's journals buried under the Louvre. Most scholars call it wishful thinking, but still, maybe. You imagine her here robed in soft linen, her hair braided back, lips moving silently as she translated star charts or annotated Aristotle, a woman teaching men in a male-dominated society, a voice of reason in a chaotic age. You can still feel the echo of her presence in the corners of this room. You sit down again, this time on a stone bench set into the curve of the wall. Someone carved a chessboard into the surface, 8 by 8 squares, etched lightly into the rock. No pieces remain, but you picture ancient scholars pausing their studies to play around. Pawn to papyrus 3. Checkmate by candlelight. There's a warmth to this hall, not just physical but emotional. A reverence like the walls remember who walked here. You don't speak, but somehow it feels like you're being spoken to. The accumulated knowledge of thousands of minds, all compressed into silence. And here you are, listening. Suddenly you notice something odd. A half-melted candle set in a bronze holder, long burned out, but clearly once used, recently. It's nestled behind a scroll with no label, just blank vellum. You tilt your head. Maybe it's a decoy, or maybe it's something waiting to be written. You run your fingers along the edge of the bench, tracing the carved initials of someone long gone. Their name doesn't matter now. What matters is that they were here, thinking, wondering, maybe even doubting themselves, just like you. Outside the hall, footsteps echo again, soft, deliberate. You turn, but there's no one there. The library breathes around you, full of ghosts and half-remembered voices, and you let them pass gently. The sunlight has gone golden, and the corridor feels bathed in honey. You follow the light slowly, making your way out of the hall of memory. The door closes softly behind you, and you swear you hear a whisper, no words, just the sound of pages turning. You step away from the hall of memory, the warm glow of the setting sun fading as the interior of the library begins to cool again. The walls feel heavier here, ancient stones that have borne witness to centuries of whispers and wonderings. Your footsteps are muffled on the polished floor as you move toward a cluster of small rooms off the main hall, places where the library's most curious experiments might have taken place. Here, it's less about scrolls and more about minds, the thinkers, the inventors, and the curious scribes who pushed boundaries. It's a workshop of words and ideas, a precursor to the modern research lab. You imagine the scent of ink and beeswax, the scratch of quills on parchment, and the soft murmur of voices debating everything from mathematics to metaphysics. Mainstream historical fact. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a repository for books. It was an intellectual hub. Scholars gathered to teach, debate, and experiment. It might even have housed early versions of mechanical devices, astronomical models, water clocks, or primitive automatons. Yes, ancient robots, or something close enough to make a historian smile. Historians still argue whether any actual machines survived, or were merely theoretical, but the idea sparks the imagination. You find yourself at a large wooden table, scarred and worn from years of use. Scattered across its surface are fragments of papyrus, some inscribed with complex diagrams that could be star charts or early blueprints. One particularly curious sketch depicts a device with gears and weights, almost like a clock, but with no hands. A mystery machine waiting to be understood or lost to time. Fringe tidbit. There's a legend that a scholar named Ctesibius invented a water-powered organ here, one that could imitate bird songs or human voices. If true, it would have been an ancient marvel, kind of like the world's first musical robot. No surviving examples exist, but the idea tickles the imagination and hints at the blend of art and science that permeated the place. As you linger, the room feels alive. You swear you hear faint echoes of conversation, a debate about the stars or the nature of the soul. You picture scholars pacing back and forth, gestures, animated hair tousled from long hours of thought. One might be explaining a newly discovered theorem, another challenging it with a cheeky grin. You lean against a stone pillar and notice small carved symbols etched near the base, early Greek letters intermingled with Egyptian hieroglyphs. This blending of cultures was a hallmark of Alexandria itself, a city where the world's knowledge converged like a river delta. It makes you wonder, was the library a melting pot of ideas or a fragile alliance of rival schools? Scholars still debate the extent of the cultural exchange here, how much Egyptian wisdom influenced Greek philosophy, or vice versa. Some suggest the library was a diplomatic tool as much as an intellectual one, a place where scholars from all corners of the ancient world coexisted, competing but also cooperating. You take a deep breath and let the quiet settle. Your eyes catch a small pot of dark ink, sitting beside a reed pen, its nib worn and frayed. Someone left it here, perhaps in a hurry or as an invitation for you to write. The thought makes you smile. Imagine the scrolls you'd create if you could join these ancient conversations. You trace the rim of the ink pot with your fingertip, feeling the weight of countless ideas waiting to be inked. What would you write if given a chance? A poem about the sunset over the Mediterranean, a treatise on the stars, or just a sleepy note saying, "I'm tired, can we continue tomorrow?" You pocket an imaginary quill and wander toward a window that overlooks the bustling streets of ancient Alexandria. Below, merchants haggle over spices, potters display their wares, and children play games of chance with tiny clay pieces. The city hums with life, a perfect contrast to the hushed reverence of the library's interior. Fringe tidbit. There's a rumor passed down in whispers that some scrolls were smuggled out of the library in hollowed-out pottery or secret compartments in merchant carts traveling across the Mediterranean to preserve knowledge from destruction. Historians still debate how much of the library's collection survived in hidden forms after the Great Fires. As the sky darkens, lanterns flicker on along the harbor, their soft glow reflecting in the water. You feel a calm settle over you, the weight of history balanced by the lightness of the present moment. You take one last look around the workshop, imagining the endless possibilities born here from the poetry of Sappho to the mechanics of Ctesibius. The library isn't just a building. It's a living, breathing mind filled with curiosity and wonder. With a quiet sigh, you turn away from the window, ready to continue your slow walk through the streets outside, still carrying the whispers of Alexandria's greatest minds in your heart. You step out from the cool shadows of the Library of Alexandria into the soft twilight of the city streets. The air carries a mix of salt from the nearby sea, mingled with scents of spices, cinnamon, frankincense, and something earthy you can't quite place. Your footsteps echo on the cobblestones, and the hum of the city settles into a gentle rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat guiding you onward. The streets here are narrower than you imagined, lined with low, whitewashed buildings topped with terracotta tiles. Wooden shutters are beginning to close as shopkeepers finish their day. A cat slips silently past your feet, eyes gleaming like twin moons, and you follow it as if it knows the secret paths of Alexandria's ancient quarters. Mainstream historical fact. Alexandria was a bustling cosmopolitan city home, not just to scholars, but also to merchants, sailors, craftsmen, and entertainers. The library was only one part of this vibrant ecosystem, a beacon for those seeking knowledge, yes, but also a backdrop for everyday life. You find yourself wandering toward the harbor where the last boats are being secured. The water laps gently against wooden hulls, and the cries of seabirds mingle with the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Lanterns flicker on poles, casting soft pools of light along the waterfront. You imagine the ships carrying scrolls, ideas, and people across the Mediterranean, spreading knowledge far beyond Alexandria's walls. Fringe tidbit. Some say that the harbor was so busy that ancient dockworkers had a secret language, a mix of hand signals and grunts, to coordinate the loading of delicate scrolls and rare books without damage. A lost language of librarians and sailors alike. Historians still argue whether such specialized communication truly existed or is just a colorful myth. You take a slow breath and lean against a stone balustrade, watching the city's glow deepen against the darkening sky. The stars begin to twinkle faintly, reminding you of the many celestial charts once studied in the library's halls. The world feels vast, full of mysteries, both ancient and waiting to be discovered. You reflect on the whispers you heard earlier, conversations about the stars, philosophy, and invention. It's easy to forget that behind the grandeur of this legendary library were real people, with hopes, doubts, and occasional jokes about how many scrolls one scholar could hoard without getting lost. Remember that peculiar sketch of the machine with no hands? You smile at the thought. Not every invention needed to be practical. Sometimes the joy was in the imagining, the dreaming, the slow unfolding of ideas. As you step back into the winding streets, the city seems to hold its breath, a timeless place suspended between knowledge and mystery. The Library of Alexandria might be gone, but its spirit lingers in every thoughtful glance, every whispered debate, every quiet moment of wonder. You pause near a small temple, the marble cool beneath your fingers. A soft breeze carries the scent of jasmine and the distant murmur of prayers. You close your eyes and listen to the past, to the present, and to the gentle promise of tomorrow's discoveries. Historians still argue whether the destruction of the library was a sudden catastrophe or a slow fading, a gradual loss of a world's greatest repository of knowledge. Whatever the truth, tonight you hold a piece of that legacy with you, a quiet companion to your dreams. So now, as the city sleeps and the stars watch over you, let your mind wander gently back through the halls of ancient Alexandria to the scholars, the scrolls, the dreams. Rest easy, knowing that curiosity never truly dies. It simply waits for the next quiet moment, the next soft whisper, the next slow walk through history. The night deepens around you, and the city's sounds soften to a gentle lullaby. Your breath slows, matching the quiet rhythm of waves caressing the shore. Imagine the library's marble pillars, cool and smooth beneath your fingertips, fading slowly into the soft dark. The voices of scholars become distant echoes, like the last notes of a lullaby drifting through an open window. Let your thoughts drift now beyond the scrolls, beyond the stars, into a space where time feels kind and the mind rests. Picture yourself reclining on soft cushions in a sunlit courtyard, warm stone beneath you, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and distant seas. The world is vast, but here, in this moment, it feels safe and still. Curiosity, like a slow burning flame, flickers quietly in your heart. It has traveled centuries with you tonight, from dusty scrolls to whispered debates, from imagined machines to starlit harbors. And now, it rests patiently waiting to light your dreams. Let the gentle pulse of history and the soft hum of the present lull you deeper into calm. There's no rush, no urgency, only the slow, peaceful unfolding of the night. Sleep now, wrapped in the quiet wonder of ancient Alexandria's greatest gift, the endless, gentle journey of learning.